In the year following the election, coming into the 2014 session, we'll have a lot more time to do that. And so, you know, it's my hope that through the delegation and working individually, excuse me, we had Representative Rollerson and I had a conversation with the mayor this morning in Plant City about really trying to work with their community to figure out, you know, how can the state legislature partner with the local community to help it achieve its vision. I think we kind of we're at our best when we're thinking that way, and broadening that concept to a legislative delegation level. We have some economic development engines in our community. There's not a lot that I'm going to, you know, I'm a perfect example. I'm in the home building business, and my industry responds to growth. We don't create it. And so if we're not having an expanding economic base in our community, we don't need my services. I think that's probably true for the vast majority of us here. And we have some real assets in MacDill Air Force Base. We have the Port of Tampa. We have the airport. And we have the university system, both the community college and the state university system, and the University of Tampa. And those are some really critical economic development engines in our community that we need to continue to invest in. Some of the things that are going on in the I-4 corridor, the I-75 corridor, that are potential spin-offs of things that are happening at University of South Florida are just a great example. The bedroom community of Brandon, it's populated with a large number of people that commute, both civilian and non-civilian, that commute to MacDill Air Force Base is a great example. A lot of people that are sending cargo and receiving cargo in and out of this port. Another great example of how this community will continue to grow and thrive if we make strategic investments in our infrastructure. And in this downtime between the close of this past session and the opening of next session, with the state now having some new recurring revenue and non-recurring revenue, it's a really good opportunity for us to look at from a delegation perspective at where are the needs, where are the strategic investments that we can make in our community that are going to get us the biggest bang for the buck, and that's where I'd like to see our delegation spend its time.
Is there anybody else on the panel who'd like to take that question, or should I move on to the next one?
One of the things that would piggyback on what Senator Lee said in terms of the ramp up to the session, so it's really hard to get educated about what's in the pipeline, what we can do the first year, but I think this next year you'll see more from the delegation in that regard. And one of the things that we've tried to do in cooperation with these guys up here is a small business roundtable, which we started before session. We're going to have it again here in the next couple of months. But the idea behind that small business roundtable is to give the small businesses in our community an opportunity to stand up and say, look, this is something we're having a problem with, and we need your help. And so I would encourage you, if you weren't our first small business roundtable, to please come to the next and bring your issues to us. It's an opportunity for us to team around the table and to get some real cohesiveness about what needs to be done practically, okay, specifically for our area. And so that would be the one thing that we could use your help with as we plan for next session.
Of course I'm going to want the mic. No, I think just two things quickly. One is what Senator Lee had said before, building relationships. The four of us have gotten to know each other very well in the last few weeks. We're going to be working on that after session, preparing for the next session, and looking regionally at this area and what we can do. The second thing that's important is what I mentioned before is repealers. When the Chamber is talking specifically about what legislators can do to help business, well, certainly the one thing is to get out of the way. And I think the repealers will be a great tool, and it's a relatively new tool that's been focused on to get repealers through the session, to get stuff off the books that's no longer applicable, that's kind of a wet blanket, if you will, on our economy and on businesses operating. So I look forward to working with these folks to do that, and I'm very excited about that.
I think we can go to the next question. I think we've covered that one.
Because since we talked about your education and experience there, this relates to state colleges and universities. We obviously realize that these universities, these public institutions receive grants and different funding from the state. Yet the question here is posed that since they accept more students from outside of Florida, is there a concern that those public funding vehicles are going to our public institutions for the state of Florida, yet we're accepting and admitting more students from outside than inside, and what are your thoughts about that, and what will they do about that?
That's a good question. It's not something that I'm familiar with. So it's not an issue that we saw this year in the legislative session, but definitely if our tax dollars are going to fund our public universities and that money's going to students from out of state, it's something we need to look at. Did anyone sit on higher education?
Yeah, I did.
Do you have anything to add?
Well, I mean, just to confirm, nothing really came across our committee directly in response to the question, but I would say that generally speaking, absolutely. I mean, we have our first accountability should be to the taxpayers of the state of Florida. I mean, I know there's a difference in in-state and out-of-state tuition because there's a distinction as far as that goes, and I think part of that thinking is that we want to help folks in the state whose families are paying taxes, state taxes and so forth. But in terms of what else can be done, whether that's really an accurate reflection of public funding, and whether the in-state or out-of-state tuition accurately reflects the difference in those two, that's something we probably should look at.
And I didn't have a name of that person, but obviously that would be a great question to follow up with them one-on-one or individually if there is additional information that you have. I think that's part of the community educating and sharing those concerns with our officials, so as they work through the summer on what they're going to plan to approach and address next year, would encourage you to do so. The next question is in regards to the pension. Obviously that was a big issue this year as well. This question particularly speaks to why are state employees who are paying in the 3% contribution, why are the dollars that are coming derived from that going to general revenue and not back to the actual pension program? So I don't know which of you would like to take that question, or if you feel...
I'll take it since I was on Government Office Committee. That money does go to the general operating fund. However, the money going into the general operating fund does not inhibit the money that's being contributed to the pension fund. So the money that's being put in the pension fund is being fully funded. This year we fully funded it. Now, to speak a little bit more about the pension fund, there has been a great deal of controversy that we are moving from a defined benefit plan to a defined contribution plan. In the House, we took that up. We tried to make that work. It didn't pass the Senate, and so we still have the same defined benefit plan as we did. But the position that we took is that if you look at municipalities, if you look at across the nation, at some of the pension plans, many of them are less than 50% funded. There's a real crisis out there with pension plans. And the defined benefit plan, how many of you in this room are under a defined benefit plan in your business? How many have a defined benefit plan? It doesn't actually work. It's a promise in the future that you may or may not be able to keep. So from a financial standpoint, we're not saying that we would not fund a good retirement fund, but we're saying that given uncertain economic times, what we're trying to do is to put some certainty to you, the Florida taxpayers. The people that work for the state deserve a good and will receive a great pension, but a defined benefit plan is really hurting and ruining a lot of pension funds across the country. And one final comment, in the state of Florida, our pension fund is 87% funded. And there are people that came to testify at our committee that said that was one of the greatest plans in the country, one of the greatest plans in the world. And I would challenge you to say that if I came to you and said that I will give you 87% of your paycheck, do you think that's well managed? And you would say no. And further, I would say to you, well, guess what? We have to get the other 13% of your paycheck from these folks over here. Do you know who these folks over here are? They're you. Okay? And I don't care how good looking you are, those other people may not want to fund that 13%, just because they think you're a good person or they like the way you look. It becomes a matter of economics. It becomes a matter of good fiscal policy. They are tough decisions to make. There is no doubt about that. But now is the time for us to face the fact that trying to continue to do this in the future could create problems. And I do not want anyone in this room to ever have to say to their children that you now have a personal income tax in the state of Florida because some actuaries did not make some very good predictions about the economy. So that's where the pension fund is, and I'll probably give you more information than you wanted, but that's it.
And I think I can speak for all of us when I say this, that the promises that we've made to state employees we need to keep those promises. If you're a current employee and you've assumed that this was going to be the case for you, you've made plans over the years based on an understanding that you would have a defined benefit, and that's you need to have that. We need to follow through with our promises as the state of Florida. And so the bill that was passed in the House would have kept that promise to existing employees. The issue was with prospective employees. How will we treat folks moving forward, right? And so the fact that we had to fund, we had an unfunded liability of our pension system of $500 million this year alone, that we had to take from general revenue to shore up the unfunded liability for that guaranteed benefit, to me, is a real-life, in-your-face example of why we cannot prospectively continue down the road that we're on.
I want to pull that for a second. I'll throw it out. We've got several questions on Medicaid reform or on healthcare reform. I think each of you might have a perspective on that. So not going into each of the questions is obviously we recognize that the House and the Senate had different approaches to how they wanted to pursue this. We had a governor who had a position and took a stance on this as well. We obviously did not see any activity actually come of it, and I know that it's going to be on the horizon going forward. So with that basic setup, share with us your specific thoughts, what you see as, where we're going to go next. But I think it's really, we understand where we've been now. Where are we going to be going? What do you foresee in the near future? What can we expect as a business community, as individuals, as citizens, on what is going to happen with the reform there?
I would have to have the microphone with that question. First of all, I would say to reiterate what Senator Lee said early on about people really of good conscience having good faith differences in opinion on this issue. It is true. And I'll go some places and talk, and I don't feel like the people in the crowd believe that in good faith I believe what I'm saying. And in fact, I have a one-to-one conversation with someone recently after a meeting, and I said, please believe me. Please believe me. The position that I've taken on this is not born out of a desire for people not to have health insurance. It is not born out of any kind of a political motivation, because in the district I'm in, I would be better politically served to take a different position. Okay, so it's not politically motivated. The issue or the differences between the House and the Senate this year had to do with moving forward. What do we do as a state of Florida? First of all, there are many states in the country right now. We're not the only one. Every state is trying to figure out what they're going to do. And I think it's about 30 states that really haven't yet made a decision about what they're going to do. So we're not, lagging behind other states here. It's a good faith, really difficult decision about what to do. Here's the difference between, in my understanding, the House and the Senate. The House took the position that we wanted to create an opportunity for, number one, more private sector type of free enterprise decisions to be implemented in the medical process. Right now, when you go to the doctor, at least I have medical insurance, and many of you may as well, I don't ask, what does that procedure cost? Do you? It's covered. So the effect of that ultimately is there's no market mechanism that's driving costs down. Costs are being driven up. And so that's generally true of our healthcare system overall, not just private versus government healthcare. But the idea and the thinking was, let's see if we can, at least in the context of this expansion, include some of those free market type decisions and principles. The idea was as well to, if we can make this work without taking federal money. And here's the reason why the federal money was an issue. Florida has a balanced budget amendment. You know that, right? We have to spend what we bring in. We can't spend any more than we bring in. The federal government does not have that. I wish we did, but they don't. We don't. And so we're making decisions long term. If in fact we take money from the federal government, and then 2 or 3, 4 years from now, the government begins to recede on the percentage that they're giving us or recede altogether because of an inability based on potentially a huge growth in the number of folks on Medicaid, what will we do as a state? Okay? What will we do as a state? Again, it comes back to the taxpayer. We have a balanced budget amendment. We can't push the decision down the road. As a state, if the federal government backs off, we have to step in. So we're thinking okay, can we create an opportunity or a solution that includes free market principles, okay, that provides medical care and maybe serves as an example to many of the other states around the country? Maybe something new. Or are we going to duplicate potentially what the federal government has done in Medicaid, which, in my opinion, has been, at best, somewhat unsuccessful in terms of access to care, in terms of outcomes, and those types of things. So, and Senator Lee can certainly speak, and the Senate plan, and I don't know where he stands in that position, so I'll let him speak for himself on that issue. But in good faith, I believe the Senate believes that we could take the money and still create a private kind of free market approach to it. But that was essentially the difference between the two. Again, I will say, I know these guys, please believe us. We're not hard-hearted. I think everybody should have medical care. The issue is, what kind of care? Is it a government system that Medicaid has shown is broken, too expensive, and out of control? Or do we try and come up with something that's better, still provides care, but still has access to the private, similar to what we enjoy, right, as benefactors of private insurance?
Well, thank you. A couple of things. When you talk, the question's really good. You talk about the pension system, you talk about the expansion of Medicaid. Now you're really getting to some of the issues that are going to define the trajectory of our budget over the next 10, 20 years. I mean, these are the real big issues that are going to affect Florida. The legacy cost in our pension system, the same legacy cost you had in Chrysler and Chevrolet or GM, that caused the impacts to the automobile industry, trying to make sure that the life expectancy of people matches up actuarially with our ability to fund a retirement system in the state of Florida in the out years. It's breaking the entire social safety net in our country, whether it's Medicare or Social Security. And so we've got to look at those things, and Medicaid falls right in that same boat. It falls right in that same boat. People are living longer, and it is a place where, as Representative Spano says, there really are two sides of this equation. We have a federal government that's borrowing 45 cents on the dollar of every dollar it spends. It's making this grand bargain with the states that, if you expand Medicaid program by 1 million Medicare beneficiaries, we'll pick up the tab for the first 3 years. But there are no guarantees after that. You don't know if the state's going to be left holding the bag. We have the teachers' unions and health and human services programs, all the kinds of things. There's a very small part of the state budget that's not already committed to some service delivery model that people expect us, and we're indeed obligated constitutionally to finance. And those people are going to come to us and go, where's our money? And we're going to say, well, we're having to dump it into a Medicaid program. So I completely understand the concerns in the House by some of the members about, gee, what's this going to look like? How's this movie play out over a few years with 1 million new people in Medicaid? When I left the Senate in 2006, the Medicaid budget was between $8 and $9 billion. And the budget was about the size it is today. Fast forward 6 years, the Medicaid budget is $21 billion. Half the babies in the state of Florida are being born into the Medicaid program, which means their mothers are making less than $25,000 a year. And so we essentially have a system right now that's being increasingly paid for by Medicare and Medicaid. And another population of people that Clint and other people know from their business, and that is the uninsured, medically indigent population that are presenting in emergency rooms, that are being reimbursed through your tax dollars by the DISH program and the low-income pool program. The cost shifts that occur between the uninsured and the government programs that inflate your own private professional business insurance for your employees to cover that unreimbursed care. We're paying these bills already. Don't let anybody give you any illusion that we're not paying these bills. We just don't have people on a program to pay them through an expanded Medicaid program. And so the question for me is sort of where Representative Spano left off, and that is, how do you craft a model that manages wellness, gives people a program to work through, and therefore manages costs, because presenting in emergency rooms is the least efficient way to provide medical care in this country, but at the same time creates a sense of personal responsibility, a glide path for people that have some subsidy based upon their ability to pay. And how do we make that in the best interest of the entire population of the state of Florida instead of just the Medicaid beneficiaries? And so there was a program crafted in the Senate that tried to give people an opportunity to have access to a subsidy that would allow them to go not into a state exchange, but like the President Obama had envisioned, but to go out into the private market and identify policies that would have a copay, where they would have some premium support from the government, but they would have a copay. They would have some responsibility, some skin in the game for helping finance their own health care based upon their ability to pay, and try to create some hybrid. The challenge is that we see this in local government. Ken Hagan was here earlier. We have people running for the school board. A one-size-fits-all model in a country or a state as diverse as America and Florida makes little sense. The federal government ought to be there to create flexibility in its programs so that states should, as to local government, do the same thing, so that whether it's health care or public education, the people, the elected officials closest to the children or closest to the constituency can craft a program that fits that particular population. This is a very inflexible, rigid federal program that places very specific mandates that without a waiver of the program from CMS, our hands are pretty tied in just how we implement. So whatever we do, I think we may end up having to go back to Washington and get a waiver implemented to do much like what we did when I was Senate President, and that is create a managed care system for the Medicaid beneficiaries under a pilot program that has since been expanded statewide. But for those of you who are hearing rumbles and rumors and interested in wanting to know, and maybe it's the next question about whether or not the legislature is going to get their hands around this, or they're going to go back into special session. The legislature will not, should not, will never, if it go back into special session until we have some idea what we're going to do when we get there. You don't want us going up on that cruise ship for weeks on end, while without a plan of what we're going to do when we get there. So until we can get some consensus between the House Speaker, the Senate President, our leadership teams in the Senate and the House, and the Governor's office, just what kind of program we're going to craft, it'd be awful premature for us to proceed down any policy path. Sorry for the long answer, but it's a really, really important question.
Okay, I'll give you a very short one from a CPA's perspective. Usually before you jump over a cliff, you want to look over and see how far you're going to fall. And statistically, the expansion of Medicaid in the state of Florida would cost $70 billion over 10 years. You divide that $70 billion by 10 and you get I don't have a calculator, but I'm going to give it a shot. You get $7 billion a year. Divide $7 billion by 1 million, which is about the number, we're using round numbers here, of the folks that we're trying to cover. Now, what does that number come to? $7,000 per person per year, okay? Now, we know from statistics that most of these folks that we're talking about insuring, the vast majority of them use less than $500 of health care a year. 1 in 6 will use $3,500 or more, and then a very small percentage will use more than that. Now, here's my question as a business person and as a CPA. If you're telling me that a government program is going to cost $7,000 per person, and they're utilizing those types of health care costs currently, because there's a small part of the population that's driving up the costs through visiting emergency rooms, okay? Those numbers to me do not add up, folks, okay? And the other part of this that we all need to realize is that we have been dealing with health care for many decades. This is an issue that has been going on that we've really seriously talked about since the Johnson administration. Well, to expect, I think we're smart guys and women. But frankly, for us to come up with an answer to all this in 60 days, I think is a little bit asking too much. So what I'm asking you as a people is, you're the ones with the answers. We can use your ideas. This is a free enterprise society, and this answer will come from a free enterprise solution. We want to help these people, there's no question, but we as a society have to help those that cannot help themselves. We cannot depend on government to do that, okay? And again, we need to get government out of the way in many of these situations. At any chance that we can do that, we have to jump on it. So it's not a heartless decision. It's one that we as people have to take care of those that can't take care of themselves. And in the meantime, I really believe that our legislature will come up with a palatable answer that everyone will feel is a good effort, that is cost considerate. We have to measure the cost before we do anything. And I think that that's really the approach that we're taking, is let's not jump over this and get political points for it. Let's look at it the way we're supposed to, as your representative, as one of you that you sent to Tallahassee to do the right thing. So that's a position that I think we've taken.
Thank you. I'll be brief. One of the things that I looked at when we were looking at the different plans and what we were going to do moving forward as it deals with healthcare was, first, let's look at the people that are affected by this. So the data and the statistics show that people who are on Medicaid have worse health outcomes than those people who are on private insurance. The data and the statistics also show that those people who are on Medicaid have worse health outcomes than those people who are uninsured. So we have a population of people that are covered under Medicaid that are having worse health outcomes than people out there who don't have health insurance at all. People say, oh, well, there's charity care, and there's, people just go to the ER, and they do. And then we look at the other states that have expanded Medicaid, and what we've seen in those states is they didn't see a decrease in their charity care. What they saw the most was people who were on private insurance that now qualified for Medicaid were making the switch. They were going to Medicaid instead of private health care insurance. So in some cases, they actually saw increases of charity care in other states. So then I said, well, in my district office, we get calls on lots and lots of issues. We've gotten several calls recently and during the legislative session from constituents that are having problems with Medicaid. They can't find a doctor. So in the greater Tampa Bay area, where we have thousands of doctors, I have constituents in my district that cannot find a doctor that will accept their Medicaid insurance. So what happens when we go down to communities like LaBelle, or communities that are very rural, that don't have access to health care like we have here in the Tampa Bay area, because we have great access to care. If we have constituents here that can't find the care, what is that going to be like for Floridians in rural areas that need health care that simply can't get it because it's not offered because of the program that we're offering? So the House's plan, what it did was it created a free market solution that did not accept the federal money. And that's one of the biggest differences between the two plans, is whether to take the money or not to take the money. And I heard a comparison recently that says, they framed it in this way: what if someone gave you $1 million home, a $2 million home? Said, you know what, for the first 3 years, we're going to pay your mortgage for you. We're going to pay it completely. And then after 3 years, we're going to pay less of it. And then there's really no guarantee after that. In a few years, we're not going to pay any of it at all. I mean, would you take that deal? Some people would. But me personally, knowing I know what my budget is, I know what I can afford, I know how much my mortgage payment costs me now, with the thinking that maybe I might be able to find the money in a couple of years, I'm not gonna take that deal, because I know that it's not the fiscally responsible thing for me to do for my future. So looking at